This episode of Where Did the Road Go is brought to you in part by our Patreons. If you want to become a patron, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? I am here with Wren Collier.
Hey, everyone.
And Timothy Renner.
Great to be back.
And I had asked for stories about strange experiences in the woods and got a few of them. Not as many as I expected. Like when we did the light show, it just was overwhelming with the number of things we got. With woods stories, I think I have 4 or 5 main ones. And there are some other listener stories that I think we should tap into if we have time. But so we're going to go over these and discuss them. One of them actually is someone who has talked to Tim before, so we will get to that. That's a longer one. All right, so let's start. I'll start with the one that someone sent me on Facebook. And so when I said strange stories in the woods, I pretty much include anything. You know, if you're in the woods or a wooded area or something over a wooded area or something, you know, it seems like a lot of very weird stuff tends to happen in the woods, as we've discussed here many times. From Bigfoot to UFOs to lights to missing people. And this one comes from Scott, I'm going to say Rondeau, but I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce his last name. He said this is what he's seen in the Greenbelt by Ottawa Airport. The first one was an orange orb UFO. It hung motionless in the sky, dimmed, got brighter, and then accelerated away in an S-curve, which is a pretty standard UFO sighting, I would say.
Yeah.
And the thing about that is that doesn't sound like a drone or anything like that. That sounds like, you know, some kind of plasma formation or something.
Yeah, I get a lot of, like, when people talk about orbs, a lot of people, like, most common is that kind of white or just whitish blue, they'll say. But you do get a lot of orange orbs. In fact, that was in my new book. The orbs, the one Christine was seeing, were orange.
Number 2 was a 2D orb. He said, I was walking along a path in the woods, and this orb, the size of a volleyball, crossed ahead of me on an intersecting path. It was brownish, appeared to be 2D like shadow people, and looked like an eye floater or something you'd see under a microscope. It couldn't have been an eye floater, however, because the branches and leaves would temporarily and partially obstruct it from my view. What I found most interesting was that as it moved along, it floated up and down with every bump and dip in the path. If it was actually flying or floating, you'd think it could move along without any interference from the ground. That's a new one on me, a 2D type of orb like that. I mean, I've seen shadow people, but
I'm wondering why he called it 2D. Yeah,
I think because it looked flat.
Because it looked flat. Okay.
I mean, that's kind of what shadow people look like. They don't look like 3-dimensional objects. They look like a shadow being cast, but like not being cast on anything.
Right. The orb from the second dimension.
I mean, that instantly makes me think of the weird polygonal thing that I saw in the woods, but...
Was it 2D-ish?
It was made up of 2D polygons.
I didn't realize that. Okay, I remember the story, but I didn't remember them being 2D.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it looked like old computer graphics or something.
Tell people the story for anyone who hasn't heard it.
Yeah, for anyone who hasn't heard it, when I was a little kid, I was hiking in the woods. I'd hiked ahead of my dad and my little brother, and I came around a bend and got spooked by some vultures that flew over me that I found on the path. And I heard this clinking noise coming from the hollow. So I looked down below me, and I saw this thing running on 4 legs in the hollow that was made up of black and white triangles. But it had the shape of like a 4-legged thing, like I thought of like a tiger, like it reminded me of a tiger, the way it ran. But yeah, it was like an old computer graphics thing, like it was made up of these, flat triangular polygons. And I didn't stick around very long to look at it very much. I got one good look at it and started running back to my dad and my little brother. And told them what I saw, and they laughed at me. And when we got back around to the same area that I saw it, of course, there was nothing there. But yeah, that story sort of reminds me of that. And it sort of makes me think, I wonder if he was seeing something 2D, or was he seeing the shadow of something 3D that was invisible?
That's an interesting way to look at it. I hadn't even thought of that.
I mean, what if something was invisible but still cast a shadow, if you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know?
So, still somehow managed to block out light.
Yeah, somehow the light, it could just be that it's outside, because both of these, the orange orb thing and this reminds me of, I've been reading The Eighth Tower lately, so I've been thinking of color spectrum kind of stuff. And if something was outside of the visible spectrum, like you wouldn't be able to see it, but theoretically it could still cast a shadow because it's still there. You just it's in a wavelength of light that you can't see.
Huh.
And the orange thing, like orange is the next color after, red and infrared.
Right.
So if something's shifting into visible light from the infrared, one of the first light colors you're going to see is orange.
It also could be that what you're seeing is only partially visible. Like the rest of, maybe that is a 3D object, but only so much of it is visible to us, hence leaving it with a two-dimensional sort of feel to it.
Yeah, it definitely calls into question like the optical situation there. Like what's going on that's causing this thing not to be perceived in the way it should be.
Or that's exactly how it wants to be perceived would be the other thing.
Yeah.
This will freak him out. Watch this.
The shadow person thing's interesting. So in your instances, Seriah, when you've seen shadow people, you've seen they look two-dimensional to you?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I didn't really think about it most of the time. But they've I've seen shadow blobs. Like the blobs I've seen have literally moved along the ground. Like almost like it was a shadow of something above it, but there's no light source above it and there's nothing above it. You know what I mean? I woke up to one on my ceiling once and it moved around it moved along the lines of the things on the ceiling. What am I trying to say here?
The eaves of the ceiling?
Yeah, well, not just the lines of the pieces of the ceiling.
Gotcha.
Like it didn't go straight across the ceiling. It seemed to be moving like in a grid. And I watched it for quite a while going, okay, I am fully awake and watching this thing. And it was in a bright room. It was because I sleep during the day a lot of times. So the room was fairly bright. And this thing just kept moving around the ceiling. And I'm like, that is bizarre. I got no bad feeling from it or anything. And eventually I just fell back asleep.
What about you, Tim? Have you ever seen shadow people or
nothing 2D?
So in your instances, you've seen shadows, but they looked 3D.
Oh no! I've never seen a shadow person.
Oh,
I should be
gotcha.
clear about that. Yeah.
I mean, the most significant shadow person I saw was when we were playing hide and seek in a graveyard, and the thing was, I thought it was a friend of mine, because it was dark. So I distinctly saw someone walking along, and I wasn't totally familiar with this place like I am now. And I saw someone walking down, and I said, hey, and I'm trying to get his attention. And then I hear him yell from the other part of the graveyard, and I'm like, all right, who am I looking at? And as I watched, it kind of hit the end of what I thought was a path and just disappeared.
Huh.
And when I went back the next day to look at that more closely, because I went over there then, but it was dark, and we didn't have flashlights or anything. This is way pre, cell phone. This was like 93 or something. When I went over there the next day, I realized no one could have walked where this thing was walking. Like, it's all rough gravel and trees and bushes and stuff like that. And I'm like, huh. So I wasn't thinking whether or not it looked 2D or 3D because I thought it was a person. I thought it was just, because he was in a darker area, I couldn't see him very well.
All of this is just making me think of the allegory of the cave.
Yeah.
Like where so much of even the UFO phenomena and all this phenomena is basically us looking at shadows being cast on a wall.
That's probably accurate. I mean, that's probably reality in general.
Yeah.
All right, the third part of Scott's stories here, he had shadow blobs with a question mark. He says, I was walking my dog in the woods in the evening. It was just starting to get dark when my dog started barking at something behind us. I turned to see this patch of dark shadow on the outside edge of the woods. Even the darkest spots in the deepest woods that I could see weren't as dark as this. It wasn't a subtle thing, where maybe I might have seen something. It stood out, around 8 or 9 feet tall, 4 feet wide or more. If I had to compare the shape to something, I'd say a flame. My dog was fixated on it and going nuts, and as I watched, 3 or 4 more of them appeared along the edge of the woods with it. I'm not sure if they appeared or if they moved there. They weren't there to begin with, then I noticed them. I wanted nothing to do with those things. I turned my back on them, calmly walked away, and did my best not to fixate or dwell on what I had just seen, and that was that.
Oh my God, that's wild.
Yeah.
I've seen that. I've seen the black flames. Yeah. I was in an out of body state, like I was having an out of body experience in my room. But yeah, like there was a big black blob in my room, like it was watching me sleep, and I remember the next morning when I wrote down in my journal like what I'd seen, I said it looked like a black fireball, like it had flames coming off of it. But it was all black, you know, it wasn't like giving off heat or light or anything, but it was like a big black fiery ball.
How big was it? Because he was saying 8 to 9 feet tall.
It was probably about 3 or 4 feet wide. Okay. And it was like, you know, a sphere. So, I mean, it was like larger than like a beach ball. Like it was pretty big. But it didn't do anything. Like I just kind of stared at it and it didn't do anything. So I kind of like, you know, left. I just left it alone.
Yeah, he said around 4 feet wide or more, and it stood around 8 or 9 feet tall.
Huh.
But he said shape-wise it was a flame. He didn't say it was acting like a flame.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, the thing I saw, too, was sort of... It's like a flame is like the only way you can really describe it. What I really think it was more like tendrils or something. Like, you know, like a black urchin kind of thing. With sort of tentacles or tendrils or something kind of coming off of it. When I saw it, it was like the tendrils were sort of moving almost as if it were like underwater or something, like some sort of deep sea creature, you know, like sort of like an anemone's arms kind of drift in the sea, you know. It was sort of like that, but it was, you know, completely black. But it's it's wild that he's seeing these in like the waking world.
Oh yeah.
You know?
That description, you know, darker than the darkest parts of the woods. That's some of the Bigfoot stuff that I'm getting, and especially more lately, it seems like more descriptions lately, people are coming up and saying it was impossibly black. Like it was so dark. Like I didn't know anything could be this black. And it's like, I mean, maybe there were some Bigfoot accounts of that earlier on that I just haven't seen, but it seems like lately, like in the past few years, we're getting these accounts of where people are just saying it was like crazy black, like so black that you couldn't make anything out.
Like the creature itself?
Yeah.
Does it have glowing eyes? Is that how they're able to see it? Or they just see
a lot of these are daytime sightings. So they just see this impossibly black figure, you know, in broad daylight.
Huh.
And I know I had posted a story from my friend Joe, who does The Last Exit with me, where he was walking along through the woods and they got to a spot where it was just impossibly black, like a void in front of them on the trail. And none of them were brave enough to go check it out.
Right.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of Shannon LaGrosse story that she's told on her show about when she was a kid, like riding dirt bikes with her friends through the woods and being sort of chased by these shadow people that she saw, like just completely pitch black, and were sort of pacing her and her friends
and
along through the forest.
Doesn't Bigfoot tend to do that too?
Pace people? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they were pacing her on a dirt bike, so they were like pacing her at like, you know, 30, 40 miles per hour.
Oh, I mean, Bigfoot have paced cars at that speed before.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. I always forget about the stories of people like seeing a Bigfoot like running alongside their car.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, Mothman chases cars.
Yeah.
So
yeah, whatever these things are, they don't seem to have a problem with speed limits or being able to keep up if they want to.
Which makes you wonder how much mass there really is there.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah.
Kind of going back to the idea that somehow they're manifestations of light more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Because movement like that is not, you know, physics would seem to be getting in the way, but they don't.
Yeah, I mean, and not to keep bringing it back to Bigfoot, but the fact that people describe them moving perfectly quietly, like, they're going through the woods, and yeah, sometimes it seems like if they're pacing somebody, they want them to know that they're there. They make a lot of noise if they're trying to scare people for whatever reason. But other times they say like it ran through the brush and didn't make a sound, like, and it was absolutely huge. Well, I mean, deer are pretty light in the foot, and then they sound when they go off and they're running. They come crashing through. Even little squirrels. If you're alone in the woods hiking, sometimes a squirrel sounds like something 5 times the size. It's just a little it's just a little squirrel hopping around.
Yep. I've had that happen many times where I'm like, what the hell is that? Oh, it's just a squirrel making all that noise?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And but they report on making no sounds, and the other thing that it reminds me of that gliding motion they talk about. They said it didn't move up and down when it went across the ground. It just was looked like it was a cross country skier. That's pretty weird stuff. And of course your hardcore creature people will say, oh, that's the mid-tarsal brake. It keeps it from bouncing up and down when it walks. Well, maybe, I don't know.
I mean, just riffing on you guys, when I am thinking about absence of, like, when it's black, well, that's absence of light, and absence of light means absence of information. And if there's a complete absence of information there, that would also include sound, and maybe even forces like kinetic and potential energy. Like maybe it's whatever it is, it's really seriously like not bound to our physical universe as we know it.
So I got this very short little story from someone. They sent it through the website, so I don't have a name. I know they were in Australia. But they said, where is it here? They had encountered something. They said they were walking along and they started to see something step out from behind a tree, then it stopped. They said that too quiet feeling happened just before I saw the lower legs step out, as though it was absorbing all surrounding ambience to get the power for something to happen. And then it just stopped. Which is creepy.
Yeah.
But the when they said, it's absorbing all surrounding ambience, that's interesting, because it kind of matches what you were just saying. Like it's an absence of something.
Yeah, exactly. It's an absence of information, and it may actually be getting rid of information around it.
Well, that's a way to look at it.
Like it's actually. So, I've had this theory about demons and spirits in general, that one of the reasons you use a magic circle when you conjure these things is not because they're violent or will lash out at you. I mean, they might, but I think the very presence of these things is sort of corrosive to reality, if that makes sense. Like, they sort of corrode the structure of the universe just by being in the physical, almost like they're a source of like entropic decay or something. I mean, I was exposed to something I conjured a while back that, left me with pretty bad physical pain for several days. Even though it didn't attack me or anything, I think its very presence caused that. And I wonder if that's the reason some people, after having these experiences, get, physical ailments. It almost seemed like radiation poisoning or physical problems, or, conjunctivitis or whatever. Like, I wonder if it's just like the very presence of these things is corrosive to people and the surrounding sort of environment.
So when I had Josh on to talk about his book on smells, which Brimstone Deceit, that's what it's called. One of the thoughts that had occurred to me between reading his book and reading an encounter Steph Young had relayed, I wonder if these things are actually decaying the moment they hit our universe. Like, whatever they are, as soon as they're here, because almost all these things are associated with sulfur, the smell of sulfur, the smell of decay. That's one of the things that Josh came up with, with this book, is that is the most common smell. So what if whatever these things are, as soon as they manifest, they're starting to decay. They can only last so long, and some of what we're encountering with them is that decay occurring.
Yeah, that's what Keel says in the Eighth Tower, that he believes that they basically build themselves a form or shift into our world, but they only have a limited amount of energy and can only stay here for a certain amount of time before they phase out and have to go back to wherever they came from.
I love The Eighth Tower.
Yeah, it's a good book.
And it's published under two different names too. It's The Eighth Tower, I think, in most places, but the US it was released under a different name.
Maybe the Ultra Terrestrials, or something like that.
I don't know. I'd have to.
I know the book subtitle's like Ultra Terrestrials and the Super Spectrum.
Yeah, that's not it. Let's see. Look this up just because I almost went and bought it again because I'm like, I don't know that one, and then I was like, oh wait, it's The Eighth Tower.
Yeah, it's a lot of like I think B-sides from the Mothman Prophecies. It's like stuff that he just cut from the Mothman Prophecies, but it's mainly a lot of like theory about what he thinks is going on, and
But I really think it's probably his best book.
It's really good. He makes one really funny prediction later on in the book where this is like unrelated to the topic at hand, but there's a thing where he's like, in the very near future, people will have little strips of plastic that they carry in their wallets that are linked to their bank accounts, and they can use it to make payments for things all around the world. And I was like, that's quite prescient, Keel.
Yeah, when did credit cards start?
I don't know. It must not have been that long after, because I think they've been around a long time, but I don't know when the Eighth Tower was published, like probably early 70s.
Yeah, I think so. I cannot find the other name for this.
But yeah, that is a thing he talks about in that's his theory, that these things shift from the what he calls the super spectrum, which is a fine analog for what I refer to as the spirit world, into our reality. And it's kind of like being underwater, right? Like you can only carry a certain amount of oxygen with you, and eventually you got to go back up for air. So they can only kind of stay here for a period of time. And that actually ties into some like occult stuff because, in necromantic rituals, like especially in Greek necromancy, it was common to make an offering of like blood or meat or whatever to the spirits that you're trying to call into existence from the spirit world. Right. And they sort of need that sustenance to maintain their form here for long enough for you to like converse with them or ask them whatever you need to ask them. And it makes me wonder if like that if Keel was onto something there, that whatever these things are, like they can only stay here for a period of time unless they have something to feed on to kind of replenish themselves.
That could be.
What if UFOs being interested in nuclear sites, like what if it's not because they give a crap about us blowing each other up, but what if it's like they're just feeding off the radiation, just so they can manifest a little bit longer?
That could be, or they seem to affect electronics, drain electronics. So I mean, that's another way they could be drained. And nuclear sites are going to be huge electromagnetic areas.
Yeah, just hoovering up the electromagnetic and electrical energy so they can stick around a little bit longer. I mean, that would even maybe time with ley lines, right? Why do these things happen along ley lines? Well, maybe that's because it provides a convenient highway, convenient source of energy, so they can stay here a little bit longer while they're traveling around.
I cannot find the name of the other name of the book. Oh well, I'm sure someone will know what it is, and shoot it along.
Yeah, make sure to comment, like, and subscribe, guys.
But yeah, because I was looking through, is there any Keel books I don't have? And I'm like, no, got it. What's this one? And I'm like, oh, this is one I haven't read before. And then in the comments, someone's like, so this is The Eighth Tower, released under a different name in the U.S.? And I'm like, oh. I paid a lot for The Eighth Tower, too, because it was out of print when I got it.
Oh, man, I think it's in print now. I mean, I think I just got it on Amazon for pretty cheap.
Yeah, it's like $10 on Amazon now.
Yeah.
I paid, I think, $70 for it.
Have you read that, Tim?
I have not.
Oh, you'd really dig it.
Yeah. I highlight definitely. I recommend all of Keel's work, including Jado, but that's probably my favorite. I think it's the most dead on about anything he's written.
Yeah, I think that was basically the thing he wrote when he kind of came out of his extraterrestrial hypothesis phase. When he started after the events of Mothman and everything that went on there, he wrote that, and I think it more kind of sums up his at least ideas on what he thinks is going on. And it's where I pull a lot of stuff about color theory and the paranormal from, because he mentions that the super spectrum is probably what lies beyond infrared and ultraviolet. And that's why a lot of times you see UFOs or strange lights sort of phase through the color spectrum. You know, they start on one end and then kind of phase over to the other end before they disappear again.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, also the way these things interact with light is interesting too. Obviously, Tim's had that experience at Site 7, pointing lasers at these things and seeing them react.
Yeah.
In the Mothman Prophecies, Gil talks about seeing these slightly colored blob UFOs above Point Pleasant, and they would shine flashlights at them, and they disappear or either disappear and reappear slightly near where they just were, or they would just move out of the way, so the light beam never hit them.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the story of Adam Davies and the Bigfoot portal thing, where Adam Davies and his friend fought off the little creatures that were attacking them at night, shadow creatures, by shining flashlights at them. Because whenever they would shine a flashlight at them, they would dissipate.
Huh. Okay, I didn't know that part of it.
Yeah, they would, the whole night, pretty much, these things were charging them. And whenever they would charge at them from this portal, they would shine their flashlight at them and they would disappear. And then they'd reappear, after a while back at the portal, and they would rush them again, and they would shine their lights at them again, and they kept doing this almost until morning.
Huh. Well, I think light is definitely a key to all of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean and we've said it before. That's the one sort of thing that goes across all of the paranormal. Whether it's UFOs or ghosts or Bigfoot or these lights that are associated with it.
Lights, and I think poltergeist activity is the other one that kicks in a lot.
Oh yeah.
All right, let's get to one of these other stories. Okay, so this they said this story did not happen in the woods proper. This is coming from Corey, but being as I was living in northern Michigan at the times, being in the woods can be rather subjected as the area is heavily forested. They said, I awoke late one night several years ago, easily a decade, if not longer. At the time, I lived with my parents. Our house sat on a small hill, perhaps total of 20 feet elevation gain over some odd 20, 30 feet. To the south of our house, where the barns were, we kept our horses and livestock, and to the south of that was a narrow strip of wooded swamp, then subsequently a large area of open fields and spare tree coverage. Beyond the barns, beyond the wooded swamp, there was a large amount of light coming. So much that it's easy to imagine as I look back that one might even compare it to the quantity of light used during nighttime construction projects. Beyond the fact that so much light was coming from an area in a remote northern Michigan where very few people lived and there were no homes, the scene was made even stranger by the fact that the light itself was pulsing, growing brighter and then dimmer, in turn at a slower pace. Startled and confused, I got out of bed and moved to the front room, which had larger windows facing to the south, to see if I could somehow get a better look. At the time, I didn't live too far from a very small airport, which was really little more than a grass strip some locals used. I worried perhaps a small plane had crashed. When I got to the front room, I was surprised to find my father standing at the windows, looking south and watching the light. We didn't speak, merely looked at each other and then turned our attention back to the windows. We watched for a while. I'm unsure how much time passed, but after a bit the light faded back into darkness. I know my father and I then spoke, although I forget our exact words. I asked something about what it could have been. My dad said he didn't know. We then said goodnight and went back to sleep. No plane crashes or the like were reported, and although I didn't talk to my dad about the situation again, I did tell some of my friends. All of them listened, but none of them had anything to say. And that's another typical light thing.
Yeah,
Well,
very similar to the thing I saw that one night with the guy was coming back with them. It was about 4 in the morning, between 3 and 4 in the morning. And the way I described it, like when he said nighttime construction project, I went, oh yeah, that's what I saw. Because I described it as being like lit up like a football field or something, but there were no, there was no overhead lights. It was just lit up on its own somehow. And it's the entire field. And that's the one where I pointed to the guy and he was like in a trance. Like it's like he couldn't see it. I mean, he acknowledged it, but I was like, I'm completely fascinated. I'm like, look at that, look over there. And he's like, yeah, and just kept driving. and I was like, wow, like to me that was a stop the car, get out and look at this for a while kind of event. And him, he was driving and he just was like, it did not register for him.
You were going to say something, Wren?
So that's just such a classic story. That's very evocative. I saw it perfectly in my head when you were reading that out, and I wanted to mention. I wonder how much time actually passed between him and his dad not seeing it and the light ending.
Yeah.
I would wonder if there was some missing time there, but
Even and not missing time like something took them, missing time like it could have entranced them to some degree.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when Tim was talking about the guy driving, not like just totally kind of ignoring it. Like, why would it have that effect on certain people?
Well, I've heard UFO accounts of that where people, like some people are looking up in the middle of the day and they're like pointing and, no one else can see it. Or a couple other people see it, but a whole crowded street, like no one else is, kind of, it's like some people are ready for it and some people aren't. I mean, I had a very similar experience with a big cat sighting near to the farm where I grew up. I used to work. That was like sort of our home office when I did telephone work, and I'd seen a big cat one day. It was 10 in the morning. I was on the way to do a job. I was by myself, and I couldn't believe it. It was huge mountain lion walking in a field, and I remember going, like, wow, that's incredible. Nobody's going to believe this. Came back. I told my brother and my father. Next day, I'm with my brother, same time of the morning, 10 in the morning, passing the same field in the same exact spot. Here's this mountain lion. And I'm like, look at that. Look. And it just didn't register for him. He was like, and just kept driving. I'm like, can you look at this? Like, will you look over there? There's a mountain lion here. Can you look at that? And he was just like not having it. It was like, he was like in a trance. Now, I will say both of these fellows had a lot in common in their personality. They're very bullheaded, and they're very kind of backwards thinking people, and that's putting it nicely. So I don't know if that had something to do with it. Where like my impression was like they just weren't ready. Like their world could not handle that information. Both of those guys. But that might be my own biases there.
Well, that's what I was going to maybe ask. I know you've had some encounter experiences, Tim, but have you ever had any like psychic experiences? Telepathy, precognitive dreams, anything like that?
I mean, I'm not thinking of anything expressly like definite. I have wondered if I have an experience like the mind speak thing, in as much as when I found that skull in the middle of the trail, I got the feeling like this is a gift for you, like this was left here for you, and I literally got the feeling like, oh, you like that other skull? Well, here's this big one. You're gonna really like this. And it was like, it's not like I heard those words, you know what I mean? But it's just, I was just overcome with this feeling like whoa, this was for me. It was weird. It was very, very hard to explain.
I wonder sometimes if people who don't have more sort of latent psychic ability are the ones that see these things the most easily or the most readily, and why some people don't see things while other people see them right in front of them. I know I recently went through Ingo Swann's Penetration again, and that was one thing that he mentioned was that psychics are sort of the ones who can perceive UFOs, or he calls them aliens, but you know what I mean, like, and that's something that you see pop up in government UFO research, where at least some parts of the government thought that psychic ability and UFOs had something in common. So yeah, it just makes me wonder if you'd had any experiences, because I know other people I know who've seen UFOs have also had psychic experiences. Like, it seems to be a common factor.
Yeah, the only thing I hesitate with that is I'm very careful of the superpower syndrome.
Yeah.
And people think they have superpowers. And,
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And we, either we all have them or we all don't, is the way I look at it. I think I often say, like, I just recognize, like, I will make note of things. Like synchronicities. Like, if you're not making note of synchronicities, to me, you're not going to have stuff happen. Like, you're going to miss some of it. Or maybe a huge portion of it. You have to note, like, whoa, why is this happening? Why is this synchronicity happening? You have to take note of it and not just wipe it away and go, oh, that's a weird coincidence, and keep on. You know, so if you're going to do that, you're going to miss stuff. And I just think, for me personally, I just think I'm like, I put myself in the places where these things happen, and that's big.
Yeah.
Like that's really big. If you're going to put yourself in these places, you're going to, I think eventually something's going to go down. And then it's, what do you do with it? You know, at that point. You can write it off or try to ignore it, or you can process it and say, you know, what does this mean?
Yeah, and I definitely think that everybody has psychic abilities. Just some people pay attention to them, some
right?
people don't.
And I think
some people are just naturally more talented. Like some people are just better at playing guitar than other people.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And I think they can be honed. They can be improved. And certainly, you know, people have practiced more and gotten better at it. You know, I think that can absolutely happen as well. Yeah.
I think there are people who are literally psychic blind. And I've met people. I particularly know a very, you know, aggressive atheist who has insisted nothing weird has ever happened to him, even when he has gut feelings about things. Half the time they turn out to be wrong, and I'm thinking, well, that's you, you know. It's and I think some people just don't have that ability. Just like some people are colorblind, you know. Some people just don't see this stuff, and some people are going to block it out too.
Right. Right. See, that's what I think is happening a lot. I think some people are. So Anthony, the guy who used to host Strange Familiars with me, he used to call certain people young souls. He'd just say they're very young souls. They're not going to see this. They're not ready for it. And you know, I kind of feel like there's some of that going on. I think that's they're just not ready for it. They can't handle it on some very deep level. So they're just like, nope.
So you think their mind itself blocks it out because
they're
just unable to process it?
Yeah, I think it's a psychic defense mechanism. Where they're just like, nope.
And we know definitely that the brain can do that, you know? It just ignores certain things that it's not happy with.
Yeah, I mean, a very silly version of this that my little brother relayed to me a couple of years ago was he was out on a job with another guy, and the other guy was driving this truck, and they were headed off to a site. And my little brother looked out the window and saw two dogs. One dog had a leash on, and the other dog was holding the leash in its mouth. So it was like, you know, a dog was walking another dog down the street, no people around. And he looked at his friend and was like, "Do you see this? This dog's walking this other dog." And his friend was like, "Yeah, that's cool," and just like totally ignored it and just kept driving. And it's like, you know, that's, you know, it's not a UFO, but that's still crazy. So some people just don't see stuff like that.
That might not be a stop the van and get out moment, but that's a slow down the van and take a look moment, right?
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to another story here. This guy's name is Bart. He's from Belgium, and he said, "I used to live in South Belgium, Derby, maybe it's Derby, Durbui, close to Veens, or in English, the bogs. My mother told me on many occasions the story about the mystery of the bog, about a girl she knew called Hilda, who walked into the bog area, which is also heavily forested. This area is famous for their pingos, naturally formed little hills created during the Ice Age, or ice time." Okay. Once on I don't know how to read this properly. It says, on a couple of occasions, this girl met with two men during her walks. Both men were clothed in red spacesuits, both had beards, and asked her questions where they could find certain minerals. Both of these men spoke Flemish, the Belgian version of Dutch, but in a quite archaic way. The high strangeness of the encounters, according to Hilda, was in the way that they were dressed and talked. There was no spaceship in this story. She returned with her uncle, who was a government forester, after a couple of months, and met again with these two strange gentlemen, asking the exact same questions again. Her uncle confirmed the description of these men, saying they were acting strange. They were behaving as if they were under an urgent pressure and were not polite at all. These forests and bogs don't have any known minerals. They had a strange dialect he could not place, and they never saw these two men again. Says the area is also known for radios having a blank spot, meaning radios do not receive any signals. The area is being surveyed regularly by helicopter to detect forest fires, etc., but at a certain area no radio is working. Hilda and her uncle have been interviewed in 1985 by a Belgian news television station about her story, which has become now a legend and myth in South Belgium. Another Belgian television series called Terloops had this radio silent spot researched by helicopters and portable radios and could prove that the phenomenon exists. This episode was aired in 1987. There is not much available about this phenomenon. I wonder if it still exists. It says both events or phenomena took place in the same vicinity. Could there be any relation?
Ooh, interesting. This is a fun story.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
You got the fairy element there?
Yeah, I was about to say this is like a fairy story, 100%.
But it also sounds like saying that could have, if they had seen a light, it would have been a UFO encounter.
Yeah, I wonder why they thought it was spacesuits. Like, he didn't describe like why they thought they were spacesuits. Like, did they have like helmets or something, or were they just like red jumpsuits?
Well, they could see their. It just says clothed in red quote spacesuits. But they both had beards, so I mean, you would think that wouldn't be a helmet.
Yeah, so they could see their face. That's because I'm like, why does it have to be a spacesuit? I mean, they didn't see a UFO, and the men didn't say they were from space.
But that was the interpretation she put on it.
Yeah, that was definitely their interpretation. Yeah, which makes sense. I mean, with the time frame that this was seen during. Wow, what a cool story. I mean, yeah, definitely. Like, I just immediately think of like dwarves,
Oh yeah,
or gnomes, like looking bearded men looking for minerals.
Mm-hmm. But it's that perfect story that falls right between the UFO and fairy encounter. It could go either, like if you told this story without telling people, any other information, and they would fit it into whichever one they preferred.
Oh yeah,
very
it's too
easily.
bad we don't have Josh on. He would love this.
Yeah, I know. I tried.
This is such a good one. We'll have to get his take on it at some point.
Josh,
yeah.
Josh is busy writing a very, very important book right now, so please leave him alone.
Well, right now he had rehearsals with his tuba.
Well, he's missing out on a primo fairy story.
Yeah, we can always
really
give it to him
cool.
again later.
So if I'm remembering the story correctly, did she go back with her uncle and they were still there?
Yeah, which is even weirder.
I know, right? Like, they're still there, just hanging out, looking for minerals.
They hadn't found their minerals yet.
Yeah, they hadn't found them yet.
And that was, and it says after a couple of months they went back, but they never saw them again. So it's like, wow, that's really bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing that they would even still be in the same spot months later.
Right, and I mean, like, what a great thing, though. You see this weird thing, and then you take this, presumably this older adult with you. Mm-hmm. You have to like come into these woods. I saw these, and then they're there. Like, how many people get to do that with their paranormal experience?
Yeah, and you just assume that he was like just humoring her too. He's like, sure, we'll go out. She probably wouldn't leave him alone about it. And then you get out there, and no, they're actually there. These weird bearded men are actually there. And
wow.
I mean,
and then never again.
Yeah, and then they disappear for good.
But I mean, that sounds like, that story could be in one of Keel's books. You know what I mean? It just sounds like one of these classic sort of stories like that. It's really neat.
Yeah, it definitely reminds me of stuff that you see in like Passport to Magonia as well, because Vale had a lot of these stories from Europe.
Right.
So I'm actually wonder if we'd seen this story in any of Vale's work. I wonder if he's aware of it, because this is definitely would have been in his wheelhouse and around the same time. But there's a lot of stories. It reminds me of this of a couple when I can't remember where this one was. I think it was in Germany, but I may be wrong here. I haven't read Magonia in a couple of years. But this guy sees a UFO on the side of the road, and this guy in a sort of a jumpsuit, like hanging out next to it. He jumps out and asks the guy, if he needs any help, because he thinks it's like some kind of broken down airplane or something.
Yeah.
And the occupant sort of just is like, he asks him where he is, and he kind of tells him where he is, and the guy seems really confused, and then he asks him what year it is. And the guy tells him what year it is, and he's like, "Oh, okay, thanks for the help," and like gets back in the UFO and like flies off. It's like these. I've been really on this kick lately. These stories from like the 60s and 70s of these like humanoids, these human aliens or whatever they are. But for all intents and purposes, they may act weird, and do weird stuff and not make any sense. But for the most part, they look human, right? Like they could pass for a human if they didn't act so weird. I don't know.
Well, Valet called, if I remember right in Dimensions, he calls it meta-logic with some of the conversations. Like, the conversations are so weird, they're almost made to short-circuit your brain.
That's an interesting take on it. I need to go back and read Dimensions because I'm working on something related to these weird humanoids. That may be interesting because, yeah, in Penetration, Ingo Swann puts forth the theory that he calls them bio-androids. He doesn't know that they're androids, but he just sort of uses that word. But his idea is that they're they are literally extraterrestrials, and that they're all psychic and can like actually kill people with their mind if they wanted to. I don't know where he gets all this. I mean, I think he just sort of riffs on his own ideas. I don't think he has any evidence for any of that, but it certainly makes me think about all the weird people that Keel saw in Point Pleasant during the Mothman stuff. Because these men in black, these weird sort of olive-skinned guys in suits and other weird characters. Like, I mean, multiple people saw them. They were definitely there, and then it just seems like they kind of disappear.
Yeah.
After about late 1970s, it's like, well, no one sees these guys anymore. So where did they go?
Yeah, and it was all in that one time period too.
Yeah, it's like all these humanoids started appearing right around, the end of World War II, and then kind of disappear by the early 1980s.
Go ahead.
And then you see, the Greys kind of took over after that.
Yeah. I think, though, when you look at all this stuff, there's so many factors we don't understand at all. Location. Why does location make a difference with these things? And not just, there's a cryptid living there, but like light phenomena. Most of these areas like Site 7 have a lot of weird stuff going on them. Yeah. So what is it about these areas that's unique? Skinwalker Ranch and places like that. But at the same time frames seem to matter. People seem to matter. Like, there's all these different factors, and probably factors we have no concept of, that all have to be just right in order for these encounters to happen. Yet at the same time, they seem to be almost like, some people just seem to have like a destiny with this stuff, Yeah. So it's not in the sense that it doesn't seem like it's by chance.
Yeah, certainly Keel thought that. He thought that certain people were sort of targeted by this phenomena for whatever reason this phenomena had. His whole idea is that it was social control, that these things were a social control mechanism. I think Valet got on that boat too.
Part of my one of the background theories that I have for Site 7 is that we have made this place. That, we were told these initial stories, and then we sort of built it from there. However we did it, not through any plan, what I mean? But we went looking for stuff, and it was the right combination of stories we were told with people going there, perhaps, and maybe we made this a place. Maybe it was sort of a place before, and maybe us going there and looking for this stuff, recharge the batteries of the area or something, or maybe it it amped up, or maybe it's the fact that we went there. The like I say, it's like the Eye of Sauron. All of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, there, look there.
That's a good analogy. You put on the ring, and the ring is engaging with this stuff, and then all of a sudden the eye is like, oh, who's that?
Yeah.
Who's that? They're looking for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I get into that a lot in my new book. It's like, be careful what you wish for, because I think there is an element of that. Absolutely.
You're not off base with that. I mean, from my own occult perspective, I know for a fact that spirits like attention, like more than anything else. Like there's they like experiencing the physical world, and they like physical things because they can't have them, and they like attention. They like telling stories, and they want you to listen to their stories, and they want you to notice that they exist. They get a kick out of that, and they're attracted to it, I think. And So, I mean, with your Site 7 thing, it may not be so much that you guys have created a tulpa, basically, a locational tulpa, but you went looking and stuff saw that you were looking and said, hey, pay attention to me. Tell my story. Let everyone know about me.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So
before you go on, sorry, I wanted to mention one thing about the radio, because we didn't talk about the radio absence.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought that was interesting that tied back into our conversation at the very beginning of the show about the absence of information. Again, you see an absence of information, an absence of radio waves.
That's true.
Think about ghosts, where people feel a cold spot. They feel an absence of heat. It almost makes me wonder, now that I'm thinking about this, maybe people shouldn't be looking for, spikes of electromagnetism, or they shouldn't be looking for, I'm thinking about ghost hunters in particular, but maybe we should be looking for the absence of things.
Well, maybe the spike, though, is them expressing what they've sucked up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like like it's radiating it after heating up with it.
Well, the absence of information thing is really neat, too, when you talk about photographs of things and why they're always blurry, right?
Yeah.
I mean...
Because there was an absence of information to capture on the
exactly.
Photograph.
It's speculative, but it's one of those speculative paths where it's like, go down that path, like poke at stuff in that direction, because I think there's something there.
All right, this next one came from Alex, and this guy said he has talked to you regarding his encounters, Tim.
I'm trying to remember. Put me on the spot.
That's okay. He said that the first one happened to him and his friend Colin while camping at Hope, BC in September.
I remember this. Okay, yes.
All right.
Yes.
He said, I have had a truly high strangeness theme in my life, strange occurrences that have spanned through a good spectrum of the paranormal, or what I call non-consensus reality events, which is a good name for it.
That's good.
Although I have witnessed and experienced a lot of strange activity over the years, I have never experienced anything to do with Sasquatch. Hey, neither have I. At least not that I'm aware of. I consider myself to be a very rational person and have a good habit of viewing my experiences through a healthy skeptical lens until I can form my opinions. What happened the other night may or may not be Sasquatch activity, but it sure as hell seemed like it. Particularly as listening to the Sasquatch Chronicles, Where Did the Road Go, and Strange Familiars has opened my eyes to a lot of other strange activity associated with such sightings. He said, my experience focuses on a strange gifting that happened when my friend and I were camping on the Fraser River in Hope, British Columbia. We had just been in Penticton, installing a driftwood sculpture for a client, but didn't want to make the full drive and ferry ride back to home to Vancouver Island. Since we had brought our camping gear for Penticton, I cannot say that word. It's Penticton. We decided to stop in Hope and chat up a local to see if there were any good free spots to camp in the bush. I wanted to be beside a river with a large enough spot for our tent. We found a thrift store in town to get some cheap warm clothing in case the weather turned a little colder. While paying for my coat, I noticed a book on the shelf with UFOs written in the title, so I asked about it. The woman behind the cash register said her husband had written it, and then we got to chatting about abduction experiences and the trauma associated. An older woman was at the counter listening to our conversation, waiting in line, I guess. I ended up purchasing a copy of the book for some camping reading and asked the counter lady if there were any free spots to camp. She was thinking about it for a minute when the older woman at the end of the counter said Union Bar Road. Of course, the counter lady said, Trafalgar Flats.
Yeah, Trafalgar.
Thank you. And proceeded to draw out directions for me. While this was happening, the older woman was staring at me, and 4 times she said, it's in the bush, the bush. I was polite and mentioned that to her that yes, that's where we wanted to camp, in the bush. We headed out to the flats, took about an hour and a half along a pretty potholed dirt road. We were quite taken aback by what we found when we rolled into the place. It was a fishing camp sprawled right beside the river. Old campers and trucks, tents set up, shacks and shanties, fishing gear and drying racks, and garbage literally everywhere. It was such an intense contrast with the absolute beauty of the spot, with long sandy beaches and dunes along the river with cloud-laced hills in the background. There seemed to be no one around. We walked around the entire place, calling out to see if anyone was there. I was scanning the entire area for signs of recent habitation. The expiry date on an old packed expiration date on an old pack of buns in the garbage pile said 3 weeks prior, so we figured that's when people were last here, which seemed very odd since this was a fishing camp and the salmon were running in full force in the river. The whole place literally felt deserted, and our investigation was. We decided to set up the tent on a sandy plateau overlooking the river. It was about 20 feet from a picnic table under a ring of trees, and 20 feet behind that was my parked truck. In my life, beset with high strangeness, I have honed my ability to take in my surroundings, energetically and otherwise. I am constantly scanning and noticing my world because one never knows what oddities might present themselves. One thing for sure is when we were walking by the picnic table at first, I knew there was nothing on it to begin with. We went for an exploratory walk down the beach and came back to set up the tent. As I was walking up to the truck, I passed the picnic table and noticed that there was a half a bottle of orange crush sitting there and 2 fresh green apples. I called to my friend to see if he had put them there, and he said, "What? What are you talking about?" He looked at the apples, but didn't recall them being there before or not. I was absolutely certain they were a new addition to the table, and I have wondered whether there was someone there with us or something more strange. Having been thoroughly exhausted from the work trip, I put it out of mind and set into relaxing. We sat by the tent for approximately an hour, listening to some music and the trains that were on either side of the river. I went up to the truck to grab a drink and noticed that the orange crush bottle was now laying on the picnic table seat and the apples were nowhere to be seen. I thought, okay, now there's something odd going on around here. My friend was weirded out as well, but kept on putting forth the theory that an animal had taken them, but I said that an animal would not have put them there in the first place. Knowing that the area is historically a hotspot for Sasquatch activity, I suggested this might be the identity of the gifter. My friend had listened to several episodes of Sasquatch Chronicles with me, and we often joke around with the Jesus Christ, get somebody out here line from the intro. I then introduced him to the odd side of Sasquatch encounters, infrared, lights, braiding, gifting, poltergeist activity, etc., and put forth that we might experience further activity, but just to remain calm and relaxed. If this was a Sasquatch, the other possibility is it was a rather bold and most likely mentally ill person messing around with us. The activity seemed very passive and communicative. I had bought a box of peaches in Princeton and decided to communicate back with whomever or whatever was doing this. I placed 2 on a picnic table beside the replaced crush bottle, and another 2 on the stump just off the dirt road about 100 feet up. I checked on them about 5 times that night and there was no more activity. We went to sleep, woke up in the morning, and I checked again, still nothing. We cleaned up our gear and packed it up and my dog in the truck. My friend was having a smoke, so I thought I'd check on the stump peaches one last time. Apparently I'm out of words. Hang on. As I was walking up, I heard a noise just off in the distance, like a smack against a log. It had a solid thud characteristic to it. I stopped mid-trail and listened, but nothing more. The peaches were still on the stump, so I walked back to the truck, which was about 60 feet down the drive from the peach stump. Within 5 minutes, we reversed the truck to leave. I was going to leave past the drive that the peaches were on, but at the last minute decided to take the fork and drive past the tents along the shore. As I was stopped for the turn, my friend yelled, "Dudes!" And I stopped the truck, and he said, "Look!" There in front of the peach stump where I had just been was an 18-inch stick jammed into the ground on the side of the drive with the green apples shoved onto it. We got out of the truck and looked at it in amazement and took a photo. The apple stick was standing straight out of the ground prior to the photo. I had lifted it for inspection. I looked for the tracks but couldn't see anything. There was no browning on the apple that was first shoved into the stick. I had a chunk ripped out of it when the stick was... It had a chunk ripped out of it where the stick was shoved through. The lack of browning suggested us that they were put on the stick quite recently. I definitely would have noticed the apple stick when I had walked up to check the peach stump a mere 10 minutes prior. I had just walked directly over to the spot twice, so we concluded that whomever did this ran out into the woods or down the dirt road while we were at the truck and shoved it into the ground there for us to see as we were heading out. Someone or something was communicating with us on that trip intelligently. My friend remarked after that, as soon as we got out of there, that he felt like we were being watched the entire time. What we feel we got from the communication with the apples was, "I am here, I am curious and watching you, I am okay with you being here." We are planning a return trip, this time without my dog, in early October. We are going to hike the area for a few days along the river and rail line. Not going to bring any video equipment, but we're thinking of purchasing some good field audio equipment. And since it was the primary communication device, we're going to bring plenty of green apples. So that was part 1. Thoughts?
Well, I mean,
Tim, this is more your wheelhouse.
yeah, I mean, this sounds like a thousand other cases of Sasquatch interaction that I've heard of. It also is one of those cases where you don't see a creature, so you go, was it?
Yeah.
But I mean, it's it's so close to these other cases. So they did stay the night in this location, or they didn't?
They did.
They did, okay. Because his part 2, I think he stays the night in another location, right?
Yeah, I believe
Okay.
so.
All right.
Yeah. Be interested to know how his dog reacted, because he said he had his dog with him. So what was his dog doing during that?
I would
Yeah.
assume nothing unusual if he didn't mention it. You would think that would have come up
Yeah.
if it had been acting weird.
Right.
He also didn't include a picture.
Yeah, I mean, from like what I see in this is like, why assume that anything was walking down there at all? Why not just as easily say whatever was interacting with you was able to move without you seeing it,
Yeah.
or was able to, dare I say, apport things if it wanted to.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
apportations are one of those things too that flows through all this different stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's 100% a part of spirit communication in the occult too. I mean, the famous story of Dr. John Dee, during one of his first angelic conjurations with Edward Kelly, had this crystal apport that he was given, by one of the angels. Sometimes when you communicate with these things, they send you things. I mean, I forget the name of the guest you had on a while back, Charles, I believe.
Charles, yeah.
Yeah, Charles had the whole story about their apports, and I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if the stone throwing and all of these other things that are sort of poltergeisty in nature aren't in some ways similar to the phenomena of apports and spirit communication.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They behave exactly like it.
Yeah.
All right, let's do the other one, which is a slight bit longer. Having a few deliveries to make in Vancouver, I thought it might be a great opportunity to get away and do a few days camping back in the town of Hope, BC. My friend Colin and I had been previously there in September after an exhaustive... Yes, we went through this. We arrived at the flats at about 8:30 p.m. It was pitch dark and our old camping spot was deserted. We thought we could start off here and explore upriver in the morning for another spot. We got camp set up, lit a fire, and placed 2 green apples in the same spot they had appeared the last time, on an old picnic table about 20 feet back from the fire. Within 15 minutes of sitting down to the fire, there was a large branch crack right behind us, and about 40 feet back, which was about 40 feet back in a large clearing. There was no wind, and it was very calm and quiet. Colin got kind of spooked, and I calmed him down, saying our words again for the intention of this trip. We're just out here camping and relaxing, not looking for Sasquatch. If something happens, then it'll happen. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I have several guidelines that I drew up prior to the trip. One of them being don't whoop, holler, wood knock, or anything else that could be considered cocky or ignorant of what these things mean. That's a good point.
Yeah.
We
I like his
also had
attitude.
Yeah. We also had a strange scent waft in several times. We did not mention this to each other until the second time. Both of us noticed it was the same smell, a sweet, sickly diarrhea odor. It wasn't that strong, but it was very clearly something that was coming from outside the camp. During the morning, while asleep and making coffee, I also heard an odd chirping sound coming from the surrounding forest, both times the same. I have always been interested in local wildlife, and this did not sound like a bird or small mammal, at least any that I know about. I knew there was some weird shanty-like cabins down the way, so before I left, I asked Colin if he wanted to see them. We walked down, and me being a sensitive and having had multiple non-consensus reality events throughout my life, I knew very well not to enter the cabins or touch anything as it could trigger energetic entities. Even though it was a pile of trash, it was also somebody else's property on someone else's land, and I respected that. Colin, however, had not had much experience in these spots in these sorts of things, and while I was looking at another shanty hut, Colin was drawn inside and began looking at things. He picked up a basket, because he loves baskets, and found a dream catcher with a silver bear on it. He started out the door of the shanty to show me, but then felt strange and dropped it in the shanty hut. I saw him come out and had a weird feeling. He went to explore this other structure, and I felt the need to go right away. I was feeling a heaviness in my chest and a lot of anxiety. I knew we should go. I said this to him, and he agreed. He said that he had the same feeling as we walked out. It was oppressive and invasive. We walked fast back to the camp and immediately went down to the river and began washing ourselves in the water. I said that it was most likely an entity that he disturbed when he went inside and disturbed the items. I introduced him to some grounding exercises as I know, as well as a mantra. The only light may enter. He could barely even speak these words, but kept on. Within a minute, we were chanting it together and grounding. We felt cleansed and better, so we decided to explore the other site after going to town for more supplies. We packed up and drove out on the trail. The place that we got to was exceptional, with a great view of the Fraser River and a pretty clean campsite. We set up camp, and I suggested more grounding as well as teaching him some moves to raise his energy. We did this for about 20 minutes to set intention in the camp as well as discourage the entity if it chose to follow him. We set up camp and started sawing wood for the night. We had brought half a truckload of wood, but it was going fast. While Colin was chopping wood, he said he heard a weird bird noise. He said it sounded like a duck but had syllables. It sounded like mena, 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 moi, coming from the railroad tracks about 300 feet away. We had also both smelled a new odor. This one was sour and pungent and came into the camp a few times. Night came, and Colin was imbibing very much with beer and cannabis. I knew this was a bad thing considering the entity we had just encountered, but he was having fun, and we were out camping. I might be his guide, but I'm not his keeper. At one point, he went down to the truck for more pot. I had a feeling that he shouldn't. He came running back up and said, "Holy F, man, I just got attacked again. Show me those grounding moves now." So I did, and we grounded, and he seemed to be okay. The next day was sunny and bright. I thought it would be a good intention to make an offering of apples and chocolate bars, so we headed out to where Colin had heard the duck sound. Later crossed the railroad tracks. Within 100 feet, we met against the steep, mossy rock face. Later, Colin told me that he wanted to gain purchase and climb it, but he decided against it, which is not like him since he's a climber at heart and wants to climb everything he sees. At the base of the mossy face, there was a stump. We put the apples and chocolate bars on it, and I said toward the face, "Here's some gifts for you." Back at the camp, the rest of the day was uneventful. Nothing much happened until 7:30 p.m. when Colin suggested he go out and check on the apples. It was dark, and the batteries on his headlamp had crashed, so I said sure and gave him my lamp, and he went off. I was sitting around the campfire messaging a dear friend when suddenly heard some whoops. I stood up and faced the rail line and realized it was Colin's voice. I yelled back as I thought he was either being funny with me or wanting to know the direction back to camp. As I was listening to his whooping, his voice suddenly turned into fear, yelling for me. This went on for a few seconds, and I realized he was in trouble. The fear in his voice is like nothing I've ever heard. I instantly went into crisis mode. My friend was in trouble with what I knew to be a Sasquatch. I leaped into my truck, honking and screaming down the trail to where I thought I heard him. I stopped the truck, turned it off, honked some more, and yelled for him out the window. I could still hear him screaming my name in agony and pure terror. Since I didn't have a headlamp, I instinctively knew things could get much worse if I went into the woods to go find him. So I put the truck in gear and burned down the trail at probably 60 kilometers an hour. It was potentially unsafe, but my friend was in trouble, and that's all I was thinking about. I had to reach the train tracks. I felt that I drove that trail like a pro rally driver. The train tracks were the only safe route I felt. It was about a kilometer away. I reached the train tracks, stopped the truck, and started running full tilt down the train tracks, yelling for Colin and telling him that I was coming. I heard faint yells from him, F off you, and I ran harder. Still yelling at the top of my lungs with full confident force running down the tracks, I couldn't hear him for a few minutes. My mind wanted to make me feel like the worst had happened, but I didn't let it. I kept going, barreling down the tracks like a loaded train. I knew what might come up against, but I didn't care. I was only going to find him and leap into the situation with full force, whatever it was. I kept yelling, "Only the light may enter," and "Leave him be," and kept on running and calling for Colin. Finally, I heard him again, on the west side of the tracks, and I could see his headlamp. His cries were defeated, agonized, and I slowed down and yelled his name. He countered angrily, "Are you Alex?" I was taken aback and said, "What?" He cried defensively, "Are you Alex?" I assured him that I was, and I said my full name. I could see him drop to the ground and start crying. I urged him to come back up to the tracks right away. After a minute, he began to climb up the grade to the tracks. He started to frantically yammer about what just happened, and I said, "Shut up, follow me, and we'll get back to camp. You can talk there." I could tell he had calmed down as he knew he was safe. We walked for about 30 seconds when I noticed an approaching southbound train coming. I led Colin off the tracks as far as I could and held him there as the train passed in front of us. It was a super long train and quite intense to experience it that close. The noises were incredible, and one stuck out to both of us was the sound that happened between the cars. It was a vibratory whooshing zoop. When the train passed, we walked the kilometer back to the truck. It seemed to take forever, and Colin was still in shock from the experience. It was interesting that he had a headlamp on and was behind me. This cast a shadow of me on the tracks, a lumbering dark shadow that made me instantly think of what I feel he had encountered. We got back to the truck and never went back to the we got back to the truck and went back to the camp. I stoked the fire. We were both severely chilled at this point, and he stood up and began to relate his story. He started off by saying, "Holy F, dude, I have never been so scared in my life. I have personally never seen someone this agitated and afraid. He knew he was safe at camp and that nothing was going to enter our space, so he was comfortable when he began to tell his experience." So his experience, I want to skip ahead a little bit here, because there's a lot of repeat here. Thoughts so far, guys?
This to me was really intense. I asked him if he could, he and Colin would like to come on Strange Familiars. I wanted them both on to tell the story, and he said he didn't think his friend would come on. A little bit too traumatic to relive. It's intense.
I will say that I love that these guys apparently live in an 80s horror movie. Like, down to the woman at the thrift store being like, in the bush. Like, and they...
This is from Colin's point of view, so I decided to go check on the apples to see if they had been disturbed at all. It's about under 10 minutes to get to the apples, so not too far. I walked over the track and into the woods. I searched about 10 minutes and came up empty-handed. I walked to the tracks, sat down and had a cigarette and a beer. Listening to music, I figured it was a nice spot to chill for a couple of minutes. I had my beer and felt I should try and find the apples one more time. They have to be there. I was listening to some funny Sasquatch song I had downloaded just for a chuckle on the trip to Hope. With the beer in me, I was feeling cocky and confident and wanted to see a gosh darn Sasquatch. I yelled 4 really good loud whoops. No response, I thought. But later he told me that he had yelled back thinking I was just trying to figure out the way to camp. So I started into the woods to find the apples. Within minutes, I heard the duck chatter about 10 feet away. A surge of adrenaline coursed through my body. I turned around and started walking back. I heard a twig snaps and a bush moving. I knew something was close to me. I started running toward the train tracks, and of course this is in the dark. Then I heard Alex about 30 feet to my left. I started running toward him. When I got to the spot I had heard Alex at, there was nothing there. All of a sudden, a loud and what sounded like energy vibration pulsated about 15 feet to the left of me, and a second later a burst in front of me and then to the left. It flashed across that area in about 45 feet in seconds. I was so terrified I started to yell for Alex in desperation, not knowing if he could even hear me. I have never heard myself or anyone else in such a terrified state. My voice didn't sound normal. I started to run in the opposite direction as fast as I could, not caring about sticks and limbs sticking to me. I could hear the leaves under my feet as I ran. I then heard something behind me getting closer and closer, thrashing through the bush until I felt it was right behind me. I stopped. It stopped. I yelled F off, F you, at the top of my lungs and screamed out for Alex. I kept running for how long, I don't know. I then heard Alex screaming my name, honking his horn and coming closer. Then nothing for what felt like ages. I kept running and running until I heard Alex calling for me from the train tracks, and I yelled to him, "Are you Alex?" And he said, "What?" Louder I yelled, "Are you Alex?" And he said, "Yes, this is Alex." I knew that it was indeed Alex. I collapsed, having nothing left in me. He told me to come to the tracks. What had been following me was now gone. I got up to the tracks, and we walked to the train trucks in silence, still shaking, confused, and terrified. I now felt safe in the truck and being in the presence of Alex. We made it back to the camp, and I told Alex my encounter, and he told me he had heard that I was in trouble and bolted his truck into throwing it into reverse and skidding out of the campsite, driving recklessly down the road to find me. He stopped halfway to the traps when he yelled and honked his horn, this being the first time I heard him. He then raced out to the tracks, etc., that, he went and found him. So that was Colin's recollection of the experience. Disorientation was a huge factor in Colin's experience. He originally knew he was on the east side of the tracks away from the river when looking for the apples 2 times, and he remembers all the vocals and brush noises on that side, but he does not remember crossing the tracks west to the riverside at all. It could have been fear blocking it out, that he actually crossed the tracks to escape the experience, but there is a side road beside the tracks at that point, to the east, and the grade up to the tracks and down is about 6 feet. I found him on the west side of the tracks, and he was completely and utterly confused as how he got there. For days, he couldn't believe I had found him there. I am unsure what happened in this regard. I did bring up the notion he may have been confused at the tracks when entering to find the apples the second time, but I know for a fact Colin is and has been a seasoned outdoorsman who knows where he is and where he needs to go. The crash that we heard just after he had finished telling his story sounded horrendous. Indeed, it sounded like it came from where I had just found him. It sounded like one rail truck came from the south, and then another not far behind it, and a massive crash noise, and then silence. I thought there had been an accident. But in any other situation, I would have gone to see if anyone was hurt or needed assistance, but I had a feeling that I shouldn't go, particularly leaving Colin alone at the camp. There was no further noises from that direction until Colin went to sleep. As I was sitting and writing by the fire, another noise popped up from that direction. It was a duck-like vocal. I heard it very clear, and it sounded like it was at the tracks. And then, not soon after, another noise which sounded like the grinding of metal. I got up, trained my ears to the noise, and it sounded like it was coming from the crash noise earlier. It sounded like it was coming, yeah. The noise lasted for a few minutes. I went to bed. Within minutes, I heard another duck vocal, this time coming from further north on the tracks, and then not soon after, more grinding noises. It was coming from the north and nowhere near the train tracks. It was accompanied by increasingly loud noises that seemed to be coming from all around. Bashes, crashes, bangs, train noises, everything. Even though the entire forest seemed to be coming alive with an increasingly loud amount of noise, I was focused on the grinding noise. It morphed into something almost musical and melodic. It reminded me of when people turned the saws that they used in the old logging days into instruments, and I couldn't reconcile why it was coming from the north of our camp, nowhere near the train tracks. We woke up the next morning and packed up the camp, eager for a hot coffee and breakfast in town. While we were mulling the experience over at breakfast, the three noises that Colin heard came up, jarring his memory. And our shared memory of being so close to the train, he concluded that the zoop noise that he had heard surrounding him in the woods was the same noise we heard when the train cars passed. Colin said that after that he'll never go back there. He acknowledges the fact that he was cocky and that he was asked prior for the experience, but that he thought it would turn out to be something completely different, a passive viewing of a distant Sasquatch. What transpired rocked his worldview about the reality of what is really out there. Having time to reflect, he feels that his actions and these experiences happened as they did to shake his previous conception of our reality and to show him personally through direct experience that there is much more to this world. I personally feel, despite Colin's absolute fear, that the experience was not aggressive. I feel that whatever was out there was following and interacting with him, was just trying to usher him out of the immediate area. The trickster element was very much in play. I feel that the mimicry during his experience, him hearing me 30 feet away, which I was not, and the train zoop noises are something to note, especially related to the subsequent noises that occurred after we went back to camp. If whatever it was can mimic my voice and a particular train noise, perhaps they could assemble the audio cacophony that ensued later. It certainly felt like it. I have not contacted Sea and Rail to see if there was an actual crash and activity in the area. I looked it up on Google and could not find anything. Only prior crashes and derails had happened years ago. To me, the timing of those noises was strange and seemed deliberate. Having been there for multiple days, we got accustomed and attuned to the train noises. The noises of that evening did not sound like anything that we had previously heard from either track on either side of the river. Perhaps it was just a rail accident and cleanup operation of some kind, I don't know, but I was feeling it was something more, particularly since I heard the duck vocals just prior to several of the noise events. There's no hard evidence of this occurrence, no audio, video, tracks, no hair samples, not even a picture of the apples and chocolate we put in the spot. We decided it would be a good idea not to go check on them in the morning and just pack up and leave, so we are left with just the eyewitness testimony, which is the majority of these strange encounters. In the addendum, he says, I knew not to bring my dog Kirby on this outing. I felt that he would be a wild card I could not play. When we got back, I picked him up from the dog sitter and brought him home. He would not set foot on the property and preferred to remain in the truck. He wouldn't leave the truck even for a beef jerky, which is not like him at all. I'm not sure if he felt the energy of the experience from us or what, but it took me a half a day to coax him inside the house, and then on a leash. He eventually returned to his usual self, but it did take a while. So that was the majority of it. Like I said, I skipped a little bit there of Colin's experience because it was just the same material basically from a different viewpoint.
Right. I mean, that's intense. And, again, no creature was seen.
Yeah, I was going to say this could just as easily be a spirit encounter. And by spirit, I don't mean ghost for the listeners. I mean, the non-human entity.
And, I've been going for some time with the idea that I've been calling Bigfoot a white. It's a it functions, let's say,
Yeah.
and in the same way as these nature spirits of old. And in your mind, you left food out for it. In their mind, it was an offering. So,
Yeah.
And leaving offerings for spirits and fairies and all that type of stuff.
Exactly.
It's,
Exactly. I mean, that's
Not only
huge.
did he leave an offering, but he conjured it too by the whooping.
Mhm.
He said, "I'm here, come, show yourself to me." And then it showed himself to him. And, this is a valuable lesson for people who would conjure spirits. You might get more than you bargained for.
And of course, if this happened in a house, someone would say ghost or poltergeist. But since it was in the woods, it gets the Sasquatch label.
Exactly.
Right.
Not to say that it wasn't. I mean, a physical creature could do these things.
Yeah, I mean, it's not inaccurate to say that people have had similar experiences and seen creatures too.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was dark, so.
Right.
But what I'm saying, it mimics these things have certain characteristics that go across all these different phenomena, and it's entirely possible that people are just labeling them based on the location or their state of mind at the time. But it also doesn't rule out that there could have been a physical undiscovered ape that they interacted with, especially in the woods of Canada and stuff.
I'm less and less buying that theory as my time goes on.
Well, so am I, but I won't cut it out completely because we don't know until we know what we're dealing with. We can't cut anything out for sure.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. But I mean, when I came into the Bigfoot thing, I was 100%. This is a flesh and blood thing. This is something that's undiscovered, and oh boy, has that changed.
Well,
but yet.
The location, this abandoned place that they're camping in, where there's nothing else, just sort of these ruins, these shacks and old trucks and, fishing gear and stuff strewn about and trash.
Mm-hmm.
So many of the old grimoires say that when you conjure spirits to go to those places, go to the place that's abandoned by humans, where there once was civilization, but there is no longer.
Well, that's
ghost roads.
Yeah, exactly. Two of my biggest places, Site 7 and Toad Road. That's exactly what they are.
It's almost important that there once was, construction and industry and people there, but it has since been abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a weird factor.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, they also had the spirit encounter earlier, what he believed to be a spirit encounter earlier on, before all this happened. So who's to say it wasn't the same spirit if it was a spirit?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he obviously thought they had some sort of spirit encounter at the shack. And even the mimicry makes me think of like I mentioned this before briefly, but the Lucrata, which was a sort of entity from Ethiopia that Pliny mentions in his histories. It's basically this monster that lives out in the wastes, in the desert in this case, but it calls out to people, with the names of their friend or their loved one, and in order to lure them out to be devoured. And this is something you see repeated a lot in a lot of different of these type of encounters. Were hyenas act the same way. The ghouls of the desert of Arabic mythology do the same thing. You could probably see the same thing in fairy stories as well. There's something about that mimicry that is luring people out in order to do something to them. And in this case, it makes me wonder, maybe it just fed on his fear, it riled him up so much because all that emotional energy is delicious.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's hard to say.
Yeah. I mean, it also too, and that's the thing too. I mean, you've read, I think you guys have read Demonic Reality, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is my number one Bible of the paranormal.
So I mean, I think we're all on the same page here that just because something may be spiritual in nature doesn't also mean it can also be physical.
Exactly.
It can be flesh and blood.
Exactly.
And also be spiritual.
That's the number one most difficult thing I find communicating to people. That absolutely, I think, when you saw this thing, absolutely, I believe it was real. You could have touched it. It could have touched you. But it also has this spiritual component. And that's, we live in this very materialistic society, and it's really hard to step beyond that, I think,
I remember hearing Graham Hancock on Coast to Coast one time doing listener calls, and he was talking about supernatural, and he was talking about this very thing that he thinks UFOs have this sort of dual quality to them, that they're both physical and not physical. And he's trying to explain it. One of the callers was explaining that, he had this encounter, or this UFO encounter, where he saw a structured craft and he reached out and he touched it, so he knows it was physical. And Graham kept trying to explain to him, yes, I'm not saying they're not physical, but I'm saying they're also something else.
Right.
Yeah, and the guy just could not wrap his brain around this. He just kept repeating, no, I touched it. I know it was physical. And Graham's going, I know you do. I'm not arguing with you. I'm saying that it was also something else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's that dualism, that materialist dualism that it's really hard for people to get beyond, especially people in the West. I don't think it's that hard for people in other parts of the world to understand. But specifically in the West, with our history of Western philosophy and primarily Rene Descartes, or Descartes, let me pronounce his name right, we sort of believe in this dualism. Either something is physical or it is not. And there's no way it can be both things. And that's simply not true.
It's almost like a koan to us, this, where it's like if your brain just locks up, it's like, no, you have to. And I think Patrick Harper in Demonic Reality expressed that better than anyone else I've ever seen.
Yes.
Clearly. And I mean, he writes beautifully too. That's the other thing. I'm like,
yes,
it's a very enjoyable read in addition to being brilliant.
He's just a fantastic writer. I mean,
all right. Well, we're out of time. So I had a couple more I was going to read, but we'll save them. And if anyone else has, any unusual stories you want to share, you can send them to stories@wheredidtheroadgo.com. But particularly weird stories in the woods we're still looking for, but anything is interesting. So send us your stories. We'll talk about them and maybe have you on if you're interested. So I thank you too. Tim, where can people find you?
Strangefamiliars.com. All that contact information goes to me. That's the podcast website, but everything, all the contact info goes there for me. And my new book is Don't Look Behind You. You can find it on Amazon or get it directly from me or wherever you buy books.
And Wren?
You can find me at liminalroom.com. My contact information is all there, or you can find me on Twitter at Mr_Apol, APOL.
All right. Thank you both.
Thanks everyone.
And a special thanks to my Patreons, without whom this show may not still be, honestly. Extra special thanks to those of you pledging $10 or more: Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Andy McNamara, Charles Beauregard, Craig Cisternos, Eric Citron, Jose A., Scott Morris Everett, Sean Cosgrove, Robert Groom, Roland Belstadt, Riker and Stark, John Rutledge Foster III, Russell Wilcoxon, Sasha Lorg, Christopher Vaughn, Samantha, Ben Crow, Carla Mahoney, Savannah Barlow, John Eddy, Chris, Mark Brady, William Lovelace, Patricia Giaquinta, Kevin Schreck, Alex Bose, and Alfred Tuttle. Thank you all so very much. Okay, feel free to keep those listener stories going. As I said, stories@wheredidtheroadgo.com is the very best place to send them. And we're going to do another listeners' stories show sometime soon. I'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.